It's a beautiful afternoon outside. Maybe we can sit in the garden later. For 5 years, Joy had bathed him, fed him, and shared her deepest secrets with a man who never answered. But when his hand gripped hers that night, strong, deliberate, and entirely impossible, she realized the most dangerous thing in that mansion wasn't his Mafia past. It was the truth he'd been hiding all along. Before we dive into this emotional journey of hidden truths and finding worth where the world says it doesn't exist, smash that subscribe button and comment below. Now let's begin. Joy's alarm screamed at 5 a.m. She silenced it with a practiced motion, her body moving before her mind fully woke. In the mirror she saw what the world always saw, a plus-sized black woman in faded scrubs. She didn't linger, the world had already decided her worth. By 6:30 a.m. she was on the bus heading to the wealthy hills where people like her were invisible. The mansion appeared through the mist like a Gothic novel, dark stone and iron gates that seemed to absorb the light. Inside, Dong sat in his wheelchair, a silhouette of perfect stillness. To the world he was a statue, a legend of the Korean underworld paralyzed by an assassin's bullet. But his eyes held something that didn't match the emptiness of his diagnosis. They were sharp, aware, and currently tracking Joy. He'd heard her arrive at 6:28 a.m., exactly 2 minutes early, just as she had for 1,825 days. In 5 years she had never treated him like a monster or a burden. "Good morning, Mr. Dong," Joy's voice was warm. As she opened the curtains, sunlight flooded the room. For a fraction of a second she caught a flicker in his gaze, but when she turned, he was a statue again. She felt fundamentally invisible, unaware that Dong had been counting every day in a journal she'd never seen. He had been maintaining an impossible deception to dismantle his empire from within, but the woman who treated him with such dignity had become the one variable he hadn't planned for, the one truth that threatened his 5-year silence. The count was finally reaching its end. The routine was a sacred choreography, a dance Joy had perfected over 60 months of repetition. Every morning the precision was absolute. Dong's green tea steeped for exactly 3 minutes, cooled to a temperature that would not scald an unresponsive throat. His wheelchair angled precisely southeast to catch the morning sun he supposedly couldn't see. The physical therapy performed with firm pressure to maintain muscle tone in a body that couldn't signal pain. "You know what's strange, Mr. Dong?" Joy said, her voice echoing through the sweet small kitchen. "I've been doing this for 5 years and I still talk to you like you can hear me. My sister says I'm wasting my breath on a man who doesn't even know I exist. But I figure even if you're stuck in there, maybe some part of you understands." She brought his breakfast on a tray, a specialized setup for soft foods and small portions. "I had a dream last night that you suddenly woke up and started talking. Isn't that silly? After all this time, you'd think I'd accept things as they are. But I imagine what you'd say if you could." What Joy couldn't see was the microscopic tension in Dong's jaw. For 5 years, he had maintained a blank expression while she poured out her vulnerabilities. He knew her childhood in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce. He knew her deep-seated belief that she was too much of everything, too big, too dark, too visible in the wrong ways and invisible in the ways that mattered. He watched her work 3 jobs to put herself through college, only to end up as a caregiver because the world had already decided her role. "My mama said God puts us where we need to be," Joy continued, washing his face with a warm cloth. "I used to think that was just a lie to feel better about disappointment. But caring for you has taught me that worth isn't about being seen. It's about showing up when nobody's watching." If she had looked into his eyes, she might have seen the suppressed emotion. Dong had built an empire on ruthlessness, but this woman, who treated him with dignity when the world saw him as an object, had reminded him that he was human. The intimacy of the routine peaked during his bath. "Okay, Mr. Dong, let's get you cleaned up." She was strong, moving his weight with practiced ease. "My sister keeps trying to set me up on dates. She doesn't get that I'm not the kind of woman men choose. I'm the kind they settle for or the kind they don't see at all. I've made my peace with that. At least here I'm needed." Dong's internal fists clenched. He wanted to tell her she was the most genuine person he had ever known, but he couldn't. His dismantling of the Mafia organization wasn't complete. Breaking cover would endanger her life. After dressing him, she positioned him by the window. "There you go, all handsome again. Not that you need much help. Even paralyzed, you're the best-looking man I've ever cared for." She laughed. "Listen to me. I really am pathetic." From his position, Dong watched her reflection in the glass. He catalogued every detail, the way she bit her lip while concentrating on accounts, the way her shoulders relaxed when she thought she was alone. The house was an empty, dark fairy tale mansion, its staff reduced to keep witnesses away. Joy was his only constant. The morning of day 1831 felt charged, as if the universe were holding its breath. Joy entered the suite and paused. Dong's head was tilted 2 degrees off its normal position. "Did someone move you?" she whispered. She checked the logs but nothing was noted. Then she saw it, a flicker in his eyes. A focus that shouldn't be possible. Her heart hammered. "Mr. Dong? Can you hear me?" She moved her hand across his field of vision. He didn't track it, but there was an undeniable awareness prickling her skin. Throughout the day, Joy watched him like a hawk. During range of motion exercises, she felt a ghost of resistance in his muscles. "Am I losing my mind?" she asked at lunch. 5 years of the same thing and suddenly I'm seeing changes everywhere. I swear something is different. Dong's internal struggle was agonizing. His body was betraying him just weeks before the final evidence was ready for the authorities. That afternoon, the tension escalated when 2 men in dark suits arrived unannounced. They were associates, their eyes cold and their English perfect. "Business matters. You can leave us," the older man snapped at Joy. "I'm his caregiver." "I don't leave him with strangers," she replied firmly. The men spoke to Dong in rapid, threatening Korean. Through it all, Dong remained a statue, but Joy caught a tiny muscle in his jaw tightening. After they left, Joy locked the suite door. "What was that?" Those men were angry. "Are you in danger?" She sat across from him, studying his face. "This mansion, the isolation, how you ended up like this, it's all connected to something bigger, isn't it?" That night, as she prepared him for bed, she noticed his fingers were slightly curled. She picked up his hand and felt it, muscle tone. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You can move. At least a little." She searched his face for a sign but found only the mask. "Or maybe I just want so badly for you to be in there that I'm making it up. But if you can hear me, I won't let anything happen to you. You've got me." After she left, Dong opened his eyes. The mask was slipping. His underbosses were suspicious of the missing funds, and Joy was becoming too observant. He had spent 5 years learning her, and now protecting her was more important than the mission itself. On day 1835, Joy arrived early, driven by a need for answers. The mansion felt eerily quiet. For the first time, she bypassed her routine to search the room. Behind the expensive suits in his closet, she found a small safe. Driven by an urgent instinct, she tried a code, the date she started working. March 15, 2020. The safe clicked open. Inside was a leather journal and several USB drives. She opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was precise and controlled. Day 1, the deception begins. They think I'm broken. They have no idea I'm finally free to do what's necessary. Joy collapsed onto the floor, scanning the pages. 5 years of documentation and observations about her. Day 127. The new caregiver Joy speaks to me as if I'm human. It's unsettling. I don't know what to do with simple human decency. Day 453. Joy felt invisible at her sister's wedding. She has no idea I see nothing else. Joy read through tears. Dong wasn't paralyzed. He had never been. While she had fed, bathed, and bared her soul to him, he had been fully aware, choosing stillness as an elaborate weapon. The journal revealed his motive. His wife and daughter had been killed 5 years ago by his own organization. He had faked the paralysis to dismantle the empire from within and bring their killers to justice. Day 1683. Soon I'll have to stand up. I'm not afraid of the organization. I'm terrified of Joy. Joy closed the journal, her mind reeling. She felt used, but as she looked at the entries, she realized Dong had been in a prison of his own making, recording her kindness like a man recording light in a dark cave. She heard a sound and quickly replaced the journal. When she emerged, she found Dong in his usual spot. But now she saw the tension. She knelt so her face was level with his. "I know," she said simply. "I found the journal. I know about your family and I know you've been listening to me for 5 years. Every pathetic confession, every moment I shared thinking you couldn't judge me." A microsecond of reaction flickered in his eyes before he regained control. "I should be furious," she continued, tears tracking down her cheeks. "I should walk out. You let me care for you while you had power I thought you'd lost. But I read why you did it. And I think part of me always knew you were in there." She stood up, looking out the window at the gardens. "Those men are coming back. Your organization is figuring it out. You're running out of time." She turned back, her voice a whisper. "I don't know how to feel about you. But I meant what I said. You're not facing this alone. Factor me into your calculations because I'm not leaving, and I'm not going to let them kill you. She stepped back and resumed her professional demeanor, beginning the morning routine as she had for 1,835 days. But the touch of her hands was different now. It carried the weight of the truth. And Dong, maintaining his facade, felt something he hadn't allowed himself in years: hope. The woman who saw him when he was invisible was not running away, she was standing with him. He continued to count, not just toward justice, but toward the moment he could finally say her name. Day 1839 arrived with the weight of an approaching storm. Joy had maintained a mask of normalcy for 4 days since discovering Dong's secret journal, but the atmosphere in the mansion had shifted. The usual silence was replaced by the low hum of anxiety and the heavy tread of extra boots on marble floors. She arrived at 6:30 a.m. to find the iron gates reinforced. Armed men Joy didn't recognize, men with hard eyes and cold smiles, patrolled the perimeter. Her access card was scrutinized 3 times before she reached Dong's suite. Waiting outside was Wolf, the head of security, his hand resting closer to his holster than usual. "Miss Joy," he said, his voice a low gravel, "we're implementing a lockdown protocol. You stay in the suite with Mr. Dong. No one else enters." "What's happening, Wolf?" Joy asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "A power struggle. The underbosses are restless. Don't open this door for anyone except me, and only if I give you the passphrase. The count is ending." Joy felt a chill. Wolf didn't know she'd read the journal, didn't know she understood the reference to Dong's meticulous day counting. She nodded, stepped inside and locked the door. Dong sat in his usual spot by the window, a silhouette of perfect stillness. Joy approached him, kneeling by his wheelchair. She spoke softly, knowing now that her words weren't falling on deaf ears. "I don't know if you can hear the chaos outside, but the world you built is coming for you. Is this what you wanted? Is justice worth the fire?" His expression remained a frozen mask, but Joy noticed the microscopic tightening of his jaw. He was a predator in a cage of his own making, listening to the footsteps of his enemies. By 2 p.m. the first tremor of the earthquake hit. A sharp knock echoed through the room. "Maintenance," a voice called through the intercom. "Need to check the security system." "What's the passphrase?" Joy asked, her finger hovering over the panic button. "Just open the door, woman. Don't make this difficult." Joy didn't move. Suddenly, shouts erupted in the hallway, followed by the terrifying rhythmic crack of gunfire. She grabbed Dong's wheelchair and pulled him into the furthest corner, shielding his body with her own. Through the reinforced oak, she heard the sounds of a war. Men who had once bowed to Dong were now fighting to claim his throne. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Then a strained voice gasped against the door, "The count is ending." Joy fumbled with the locks. Wolf slumped against the frame, blood blossoming across his white shirt. "They're coming," he wheezed. "The underbosses found out about the evidence you've been compiling, Mr. Dong. They're coming to burn it all down. Joy, you have to run." "I'm not leaving him," Joy said, her voice steadier than she felt. Wolf looked at her with grim respect. "The evidence is on a timer in the office down the hall. It auto-delivers to the FBI at midnight, but if they reach the server first, they'll wipe it." "I can't reach it. I'm spent." He collapsed, losing consciousness. Joy dragged his heavy frame inside and bolted the door. She turned to Dong, the man she had served for 5 years, the man who was currently watching his empire crumble in silence. "I'm going to that office," Joy told him. "I know you want me to run, but you've been listening to me for 5 years. You should know by now that I don't abandon people I care about." She saw it then, his eyes widening fractionally, a silent, desperate plea. She squeezed his hand, felt a ghost of a response, and slipped out into the blood-stained hallway. The mansion was a labyrinth of shadows. Joy moved with a hunter's focus, reaching Dong's private office 3 doors down. Inside, the room was a command center of glowing monitors. She found the terminal, 23 minutes until delivery. But a red warning light flashed. Remote override detected. The underbosses were already hacking the system from the basement. Joy realized the only way to save the evidence was a manual biometric override. It needed Dong's fingerprint or his voice. She grabbed the encrypted laptop, yanked the cables, and ran. She burst back into the suite just as a battering ram hit the outer door. Boom, boom. The frame was splintering. "Mr. Dong, look at me," Joy cried, setting the laptop on his lap. "They're stopping the delivery. I need your voice. I need you to break the silence. Please, let them see you. Let me see you." Outside, the door groaned under another massive impact. A crack appeared in the wood. They're going to kill us both. Joy shouted over the noise. But don't let them win. Don't let your family's death be for nothing. I've spent 5 years talking to you, feeling invisible to the world but hoping I wasn't invisible to you. Prove me right. The door's hinges screamed. Then a miracle happened. The hand that had been limp for 1,839 days moved. Dong's fingers curled around Joy's hand, his grip like iron. He turned his head, his eyes burning with a fire that had been suppressed for half a decade. Joy. The sound of his voice was rough, like gravel and velvet, echoing with years of unspoken thoughts. Joy froze, tears pricking her eyes. You were never invisible, he rasped, his voice gaining strength even as the door began to give way. I saw everything. Every kindness. Every tear. You saved me from the dark, Joy. He placed his trembling finger on the biometric scanner. The screen turned green. Manual override confirmed. Uploading. 14 minutes, Joy whispered. We have 5, Dong replied, his voice now commanding, the voice of a man who had once ruled a city. He looked at the shattered door. There is a service corridor behind the bookshelf. Go, Joy. Run while they focus on me. No, Joy said, standing tall. We face them together. Dong looked at her with a mixture of agony and wonder. I lied to you for years. I used you. Why stay? Because for the first time in my life I found someone who was actually listening, she replied. Dong's face hardened with a new purpose. Then stand behind me. I've been sitting for 5 years. It's time I stood up. The door exploded inward. 4 men charged in, guns raised. They skidded to a halt, their faces contorting into masks of pure terror. Dong was standing. He wasn't the statue they had mocked. He stood tall, his tailored suit hanging off a frame that was lean but lethal. His eyes were cold enough to freeze the blood in their veins. Surprise, Dong said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. You faked it, hissed Lee, the lead usurper. You've been playing us for fools. I've been documenting your every sin, Lee. The evidence is at the FBI. In 10 minutes your lives are over. Then we'll kill you now. Lee roared, raising his weapon. The room erupted. Dong, fueled by 5 years of dormant rage, moved with a fluidity that defied his supposed atrophy. He shoved Joy toward the bookshelf as the first shots rang out. Wolf, regaining a sliver of consciousness by the door, fired from the floor, catching one man in the leg. The distraction was all Dong needed. He disarmed the nearest guard with a sickening crack of bone and used the man as a shield. Joy didn't just hide. She grabbed a heavy bronze bust from a pedestal and swung. It connected with the temple of a man aiming at Dong's back. He dropped like a stone. I told you I wasn't leaving, she yelled. Dong caught Lee's wrist as the underboss tried to fire again. A single, precise blow to the throat sent Lee to the ground, gasping for air. The fight was short, brutal, and final. As the last of the traitors fell, the laptop chimed with a neutral, electronic bell. Upload complete. Transmission successful. Dong leaned against the desk, a red stain spreading across his shoulder where a graze had opened his skin. He looked at the chaos, then at Joy. The sirens of a dozen police cruisers began to wail in the distance, drawing closer to the fog-shrouded mansion. It's over, Dong whispered. The Empire is gone. What happens now? Joy asked. The police are coming for a Mafia boss, Dong said, looking at her intently. They'll find a man who has confessed to everything in those files. But Wolf? Wolf mentioned a failsafe. Wolf managed a pained grin from the doorway. Service corridor. Leads to the old docks. There's a boat, documents, a new life. I'll tell them you died in the fire, boss. I'll give you the ghost you've been playing at for years. Dong turned to Joy. He reached out, his hand open and honest for the first time. I have a new name and a place where no one knows us. I'm asking you to come with me. Not as a maid. Not as a nurse. But as the woman who finally made me want to live. Joy looked at the man she had cared for, the man who had seen her when the rest of the world looked through her. She thought of the cold studio apartment and the discount scrubs. Then she looked at the hand offering her a world of truth. No more secrets? She asked. No more secrets, he promised. The police were breaching the front hall. Joy took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. Together, they stepped into the darkness of the hidden corridor, leaving the mansion, the Mafia, and their old identities behind. They emerged an hour later at the edge of the water, the salt air stinging their lungs. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden path across the ocean, they stepped onto a small boat. Dong looked back at the smoke rising from the hills one last time, then turned to Joy. He didn't look like a boss or a statue. He just looked like a man. "Let's go," he said. They left no footprints in the water, only the fading echo of a story that began with silence and ended with a choice. For Joy, the world was no longer a place where she had to hide. She was seen. She was loved. And for the first time in 5 years, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The heavy iron gates of the mansion groaned shut behind Joy, the sound final and cold. The underbosses had wasted no time. The moment they suspected Dong's betrayal of the organization's accounts, they had purged the house of unnecessary staff. They had called her a fool, laughing as they shoved her toward the street, telling her she'd spent 5 years talking to a corpse while the real business was being handled in the shadows. Joy stood on the rain-slicked pavement, her cheap scrubs soaking through, her heart hammering against her ribs. She should walk away. She should take the secret severance pay she'd tucked into her shoe and never look back. But as she looked at the dark, looming silhouette of the estate, she didn't see a Mafia stronghold. She saw a man who had shed a single, silent tear in the dark. She saw a man who had gripped her hand not to hurt her, but to hold on for dear life. Dong wasn't a statue to her. He was a person who had been inside for too long, and now that the monsters had realized he was a threat, they were going to finish what the first assassin had started. "He's an idiot," she whispered into the rain, her voice trembling. "A self-sacrificing, stubborn idiot." She knew what would happen if she went back. She was just a maid, a woman the world deemed invisible, with no weapons and no power. But she also knew that for 5 years she had been the only one who treated Dong like he was still alive. She couldn't let him die alone in that cold library. Turning her back on the safety of the street, Joy found the loose stone in the perimeter wall she'd noticed years ago. She climbed, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her hands scraping against the rough rock. She wasn't leaving him. Not now. Not when he had finally started to wake up. Inside the grand hall, the air was thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and impending violence. The 3 underbosses stood in a semicircle around Dong's wheelchair. They were shouting, waving ledgers and tablets that showed their offshore accounts bleeding dry. They mocked him, spitting at the feet of the man who had once ruled them, convinced he was a helpless passenger in his own skin. "5 years we waited for you to die, Dong," the eldest one hissed, drawing a silver-plated pistol. "But since you want to play games with our money from your chair, we'll just speed up the process." The heavy double doors of the hall swung open with a thud. Joy stood there, drenched, shivering but with her chin tilted high. The men turned, stunned by the audacity of the invisible woman returning to the mouth of the wolf. "Get out of here, Joy," the boss yelled, but the words didn't come from his mouth. They were written in the desperate, wide stare of his eyes. "I forgot his medication," Joy said, her voice remarkably steady despite the gun pointed at her. She walked forward, stepping into the circle of killers. "He needs his treatment. You can kill him after, but I won't let him suffer." The underbosses laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. "You really are a pathetic creature," the leader sneered, turning the gun from Dong toward Joy's chest. "You love a ghost. Fine. You can go first." The click of the safety being disengaged echoed in the silent hall. Joy closed her eyes, bracing for the end. But the sound that followed wasn't a gunshot. It was the rhythmic, mechanical whine of the wheelchair's motor, followed by a sharp, metallic snap. Joy opened her eyes and gasped. For the first time in 1,825 days, Dong was moving. But it wasn't a twitch or a flicker. With a slow, agonizing grace, he placed his hands on the armrests. His muscles, which the world thought had withered into uselessness, bunched and corded under the fabric of his suit. He rose. 1 inch. 2. Then, with a sudden surge of raw, violent willpower, he stood fully upright. He loomed over them, a head taller than his executioners, his presence filling the room like a sudden storm. The underbosses stumbled back, their faces turning ashen. To them it was like seeing a god descend from a pedestal. "Put the gun down," Dong said. His voice was deep, raspy from years of disuse, but it carried the weight of a king. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need to. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, encrypted drive. "Every transaction, every murder, every shipment you've moved in the last 5 years is on this. The FBI is at the gates. I didn't spend 5 years in this chair to lose to men like you. I spent 5 years building your gallows." He stepped forward, his gait slightly stiff but predatory, shielding Joy with his massive frame. He was no longer the patient, he was the protector. The silver pistol trembled in the underboss's hand before dropping to the marble floor with a clatter. The legend of the paralyzed boss was dead, but the man who had survived was far more terrifying. "Go," Dong commanded as the distant wail of sirens began to pierce the night. "Run." See how far you get before the world I built for you collapses. As the criminals scrambled for the exits, the silence returned to the hall, heavy and profound. Dong turned slowly to face Joy. The adrenaline that had sustained him seemed to flicker, and he swayed. Joy caught him, her strong arms wrapping around his waist, supporting his weight just as she had for half a decade. He looked down at her, his eyes shining with a vulnerability he had never allowed himself to show. "You came back," he whispered, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a stray raindrop. "I told you," she whispered back, tears finally spilling over. "It was a beautiful afternoon. I didn't want you to miss the garden." 6 months later, the mist and the dark stones of the mansion were a world away. The air here smelled of salt and jasmine, and the only sound was the rhythmic pulse of the turquoise ocean hitting the shore. On a secluded stretch of white sand, a small white house stood with its doors wide open to the breeze. Joy sat on the porch, her skin glowing in the golden hour of the afternoon. She was no longer wearing faded scrubs or hiding her reflection. She wore a bright, flowing dress that caught the wind, looking every bit like the woman she had always been but had been too afraid to see. A tall figure emerged from the surf, walking with a slight rhythmic limp that only made him look more grounded, more real. Dong reached the porch, his face tan and relaxed, the sharp angles of his past smoothed over by peace. He didn't look like a mob boss or a legend. He looked like a man who had finally found his home. He reached out, his fingers intertwining with hers, pulling her up from her chair. They stood there for a long time, watching the tide begin to wash away the footprints they had left in the sand earlier that morning. The secrets, the lies, and the invisible masks had all been stripped away, leaving only the truth of two people who had seen each other when the rest of the world looked away. Dong leaned in, resting his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent of the sea in her skin. "The water is perfect," he murmured. Joy smiled, leaning into his strength, knowing she was finally enough. "I believe you." He looked at the open door of their home, then back at her, his eyes full of the quiet promise of 1,000 tomorrows. "Let's go inside," he said. The words were the same ones he'd spoken the day he first stood up, the day the world changed. But this time they didn't mean hiding. They meant living. Together they walked through the door, leaving the shadows of the past behind forever.